Good evening, everyone. Welcome again to another live streaming of basic transfer pricing. And tonight, our topic will be on the legal basis of transfer pricing documentation, and we will also discuss the last part of the. Good evening, everyone. Welcome again to another live streaming of basic transfer. Pharma Distributor versus the uh, High Eastern Court of Denmark, no? So, yun po yung ating discussions tonight. And ilan na yung ating subscriber dyan?
704.
Okay, so thank you very much po sa subscribers natin. Umabot na tayo ng 704 as of today, March 23, no? 2021. Okay. So thank you very much, and let's continue with our discussions. And why is it that it's very important and timely that we have to discuss our legal basis for transfer pricing documentation? Because of the BAR requirements on the attachment this coming annual income tax return filing, that we have to attach the BIR Form 1709. Okay. So I have here the legal basis of the documentation with transfer pricing. So what are the rules and the regulations that requires documentation of our business transactions, like commercial and financial transactions as required in this transfer pricing guidelines? So we have our Revenue Regulations 2-2013. Yun yung pinaka transfer pricing guidelines natin na nauna dito sa Pilipinas. But the legal basis of that Revenue Regulations 2-2013 is the Section 50 of the National Internal Revenue Code. And what is that? Section 50 of the National Internal Revenue Code, which is also the same as the Section 482 of the IRC, or the Internal Revenue Code of the US. No? So the Section 50 of our tax code gives the authority to our Commissioner of Internal Revenue, the head of the Bureau of Internal Revenue, to make an allocation, distribution, or to allocate, apportion, distribute income and deductions if he sees to it that the taxpayers overclaimed its deductions or underclaim its underdeclared its income, no? And what is the purpose of that Section 50? To avoid evasion of taxes, no? And what are the transactions involved in that Section 50? The controlled transactions, no? Whether direct or indirect control over the transactions. And also we have the transfer pricing audit guidelines, which is Revenue Regulations 19-2020, which requires the BIR form number 1709, replacing number 1702AH, series of 1992. And saan po natin makukuha itong BIR form 1709? Nakita mo na ba ito, Hari? Nagpa-download ka na? Sa BIR?
Wala pa. Di ba siya available sa EBIR?
Sa BIR forms lang?
Apo, sa website.
Okay. So, hindi po siya available sa ABIR. Sa BIR website lang po na forms available po. So, ano yung gagawin natin? We will download the form and then fill it up manually. No? And then we have our... Pwede rin ba siyang i-fill up na sa computer?
Apo, pwede ma'am, sa PDF.
Okay, i-download po ninyo ng PDF and then fill the form, no? Fill it up. And then we have Revenue Regulations 34-2020. This is the one who amends the 19-2020, which gives threshold to those who are required to submit BIR Form 1709. At sino po yung may threshold na ngayon para doon sa BIR Form 1709? Yun yung mga mandatory lang po yun sa mga large taxpayers, sa mga entities that has enjoying tax incentives, no? So like PESA registered enterprises, BOI registered enterprises. And then kasama din yung mga companies that incur losses for 2 consecutive years and the 1 current year. So all in all, 3 years po sila na sunod-sunod declaring net loss. No? So kasama din sila. And then when it comes to amount, yung amount na 150 million with 90 million sales between related parties, kasama po sila na mandatory na magbibigay ng 1709 na form, and also those na may sale of tangible assets na 60 million, no? Tsaka yung sale of services na 15 million. So kasama po. Okay. So ano pa yung ating regulations that requires documentation? The Revenue Memorandum Circular 76-2020, which clarifies certain issues on the filing of BIF Form number 1709 on related party transactions, RPT form, and its attachments. And then we have to go back now to the legal basis of our transfer pricing documentation. No? Why is it that documentation is very important? No? So, ano sabi po dito under Section 12 of the Revenue Regulations 13-2013, 2-2013 rather. Section 12, documentation, no? Ano tong regulations na to? Revenue Regulations 2-2013. So, ano sabi po niya dito? Taxpayers must demonstrate that their transfer prices are consistent with the arm's length principle. So, ano po yung purpose ng transfer pricing documentation? To show that the taxpayer in its financial and commercial transactions adheres to the arm's length principle. And what is this arm's length principle? This is the internationally agreed principle in transfer pricing that requires that related party transactions or the financial and commercial transactions between related parties should be at par or similar with that of the independent party transactions. Why? Because the independent party transactions are the true transactions because they are influenced only by the forces in the market, unlike related party transactions which are influenced directly or indirectly by the control of one party over the other. Okay. The main purpose of keeping adequate documentation is for taxpayers to be able to, number one, defend their transfer pricing analysis. No? So, if you are having or you have the transfer pricing analysis, there must also, or it should be coupled with documentation. That's why very timely yung ating case. This is the Pharma Distributor, AS, because the case, no, from the beginning up to the end of its trial, make use of the transfer pricing documentation, which is the transfer pricing analysis report of the taxpayer. So all the disallowances, all the findings of the tax authority were based on the transfer pricing documentation of the taxpayer. No? Kaya nga careful tayo in making a transfer pricing documentation because that document will be in your favor or it might also be against you. Next, purpose of documentation is to prevent transfer pricing adjustments arising from tax examinations. No? Dito sa transfer pricing adjustment arising from tax examinations, the example of the case na nakita ko na very relevant and applicable is that of the Agra City. No? Yung bumili sila ng mga chemicals. No? And then gumawa sila ng another company in Barbados na lahat ng mga intangibles, lahat ng operations, lahat ng inventories were transferred to Agco Barbados na dati siya sa US, no? Yung US Tax Authority hindi nagreklamo. Sino yung nagreklamo? Yung Canadian Tax Authority. And in that case, talo yung Canadian Revenue Agency. Why? Because during the trial, the taxpayer or the Agra City were able to present all the needed documents. And the sales, the documentations are properly accounted for. So, panalo yung taxpayer. That's why the importance of documentation. No? very, very important because ano sabi po dito sa number 2, it can prevent transfer pricing adjustment arising from the tax examination. So in the case of Agra City, even if the tax authority or the Canadian Revenue Agency make some adjustments, no? Kasi ang gusto nila, yung sales of Agco Barbados should be treated as sales of Agra City in Canada, no? But Agco Barbados was able to present proof, no? And even the risk that it should suffer as owner of the inventory. No? So the court was able to, that Agra City was able to convince the court that their transactions are arm's length through proper documentation. And next purpose for documentation is to support their application for MAP or the mutual agreement procedures. Taxpayers who have not prepared adequate documentation may find their application for MAP rejected, or that the transfer pricing issue would be much more difficult to resolve. What is this mutual agreement procedure? Ito po yung parang ruling that you apply or file in the BAR so that your transfer pricing policies will never be questioned, no? Hindi ka na magkaroon ng comparability adjustments during the transfer pricing audit if you filed the mutual agreement procedure or you have convinced the BAR that your transfer pricing are arm's length, no? So, yun po yung purpose ng transfer pricing documentation. Defend their transfer pricing analysis, prevent transfer pricing adjustments arising from tax examinations, and support their applications for MAP, no? So, for documentation purposes, there are retention requirements. And anong sabi po ng BAR? The BAR does not require transfer pricing documents to be submitted when the tax returns are filed. So, consistent na siya with the requirements of Revenue Regulations 34-2020. Why? Because Revenue Regulations 19-2020 requires that the transfer pricing documentation should be submitted with the BAR Form 1709 during the filing of the annual income tax return. So, if we go back to the original po na regulations in transfer pricing, ano sabi niya dito? Hindi siya ipafile, no? Transfer pricing documents to be submitted with the tax returns are filed. So, however, such documents should be retained by the taxpayers and submitted to BAR when required or requested to do so. And when is the taxpayer requested to submit its documents? Kailan siya nagsasubmit na documents? During the tax examinations when the examiner is given letter of authority to conduct audit and investigation, no? So in the Philippines, there is no separate letter of authority. Ano ang kasama sa letter of authority? All taxes, no? So the examiner will be issued letter of authority to investigate or to conduct audit with the taxpayers to all taxes, no? For all taxes of the taxpayers. But of course, during the audit, and the examiners will find that there is transfer pricing issues because there are related transactions, then taxpayers will be required to present transfer pricing documentation during the audit or investigation. No? So, when required or requested. And then the retention period. So, the transfer pricing documents must be retained or preserved within the period specifically provided in the tax code as the retention period unless a different period is otherwise legally provided. So, if we try to visit our regulations, how long the document should be retained, then it is for 10 years. No? So, however, it is to the best interest of the taxpayer to maintain documentation for purposes of MAP and possible transfer pricing examination. So, you have to maintain your transfer pricing documentation. No? So, ano pa ang required? The contemporaneousness of the documentation. And what do you mean by contemporaneous? Transfer pricing documents must be contemporaneous. It is contemporaneous if it exists or is brought into existence at the time the associated enterprises develop or implement any arrangement that might raise transfer pricing issues or review this arrangement when preparing tax returns. No? So, yun po yung sinasabi ng regulations that the transfer pricing documentation should be contemporaneous or existing at the time of the transactions. Hindi yung during investigations na lang gagawa ng kontrata in support of the transactions that happened a long time ago. No? So when we say contemporaneous, during the time that you executed the contract, you approved the contract, then it should be in writing, no? And then properly notarized as the form, no? As to its form. Okay. So, documentation details. Ito yung details ng transfer pricing documents include but are not limited to the following. So, when we say include but not limited to the following, there can be another documents, similar documents, or other kind of documents relevant to the transfer pricing audit that can be required during the tax audit. No, these are only few documentation. No, so number one, we have organizational structure, nature of the business, industry, and market conditions. And then what are the controlled transactions, no? Assumptions, strategies, and policies. And we have the cost contribution arrangements, kung meron, comparability functions, functional, and risk analysis, no? So itong comparability analysis, this is very important. And in fact, this is the heart of transfer pricing. Why? Because if there is no comparability, then there is no transfer pricing. Why? Because transfer pricing, the essence of transfer pricing is the comparability, or you have to compare the related party transactions with that of the independent party transactions on the assumptions that the independent party transaction is the true transaction. So functional and risk analysis, of course, we have to be very particular about the functions of the companies, because when we compare the companies with the same functions. No, we cannot compare companies having different functions. No, they cannot be compared. And also the risk analysis. The company should bear the same risk. No. And next, number 7 is the selection of the transfer pricing method. So it is very important. How are you going to document the transfer pricing method or the selection? Of course, we have to follow certain guidelines. And what are that guidelines? We follow the OECD transfer pricing guideline, no, on documentation. And then we have the application of the transfer pricing method. Here in the Philippines, we follow the best method rule, or in the wordings of the OECD transfer pricing guideline, the most appropriate method in the case. No? So sa atin, application of the transfer pricing method, the best method rule. Why? We have to apply all the methods and then recommend the best method. No? And then the background documents. So what are the background documents? Those that are supplemental or related to the study. And what are the index to documents? Our source documents, no? Which we make it reference during the study. Okay? So there are penalties provided. Ano yun? If there are violations on the requirements, then the penalties as provided for in the National Internal Revenue Code will be imposed. No? Okay. So that is for the Revenue Regulations 2013. At ang sabi natin, meron pa tayong mga documentation requirements from other regulations. Ano naman yung pinakamatindi or pinakamarami? Ito yung Revenue Audit Memorandum Order 1-2019, which is the Philippine transfer pricing audit guidelines. And when we say audit, anong ginagawa during the audit? We match the documents with that of the transactions, no? So nagbabouncing tayo ng transactions through the supporting documents. Anong mangyayari pagka walang supporting documents during the audit, no? Automatic, may may disallowance, may adjustment na kaagad yan, no? Why? Kasi ano ba yung purpose ng audit? To see to it that the taxpayer complies with the tax laws, and for you to be able to convince the examiner that you comply with the tax laws is your documentation. Okay. So, tingnan natin itong Revenue Regulations 1-2019. Shout out, Harry. Ilan yung viewers natin?
7 viewers.
Okay, so we have 7 viewers. Good evening po sa mga viewers natin, no? Tingnan natin kung ano yung mga documentations ng 1-2019. Although, ako kasi ngayon, ilan na yung ginagawang transfer pricing audit natin? 12, no? Ilan pala yung natapos? 2. Sakit na mata. 10 pa. Oh my goodness. Pero kaya yan, no? Basta't lagyan mo lang ng sistema and then you know where to get your information or data. Mabilis lang po, no? Ang kalaban lang natin dyan, yung mga information natin sa is-easy. Na-email na ba, Hari?
Nagbigay ko na kay Sir. Kaya napamana.
Follow up mo siya kung kailan makuha kasi very important po ang information that we gather at the SEC, no? Sa Securities and Exchange Commission on the financial statements of the comparables, because those are the basis. Doon tayo kumukuha ng mga information when we compare, no? So, sa RAMO 1-2019, the Transfer Pricing Audit Guidelines, anong mga requirements dito, no? Na mga documents, no? Meron siyang tinatawag dito na segmented financial statements. So, I'm very particular. Ngayon, pag gumagawa ako at marami siyang mga subsidiaries, marami siyang mga line of products or line of service, inaano ko na, no? Pinapasegmentize ko na yung financial statement. No? Okay. So, tingnan natin kung ano yung documentation requirements nitong RAMO 1-2019. No? Kasi ang dami niyang requirements. No? Ano-ano yung mga requirements niya. Ito yung mga nandyan sa request of information. Tingnan natin, ha. Super dami. Ito sa annex, no? We have Annex 1, Request Letter of Information or Proofs. Ano yung hinihingi niyan dito? In connection with letter of authority number dated, may we request for information or proof as indicated in the list attached, no? So, mayroon siyang attached na list. We will see kung ano yung letter na yan, no? Okay. So, meron siyang annex to the statement letter, no? Ano siya sabi niya dito? In this case, the taxpayer, no, company name, TIN, address, herewith state that in the context of issuance of LOA number, dated or covering taxable year, have given information in the form of yan, related party transactions. So, documents that will support your related party transactions, the segmented financial statements, the supply chain management analysis, the functions, assets, and risk, no, for analysis. So when we say functions, assets, and risk, we have to refer to the industry, no? Kung ano yung functions, kung ano yung assets used, at saka kung ano yung risk inherent in the industry of the taxpayer. And we have the characteristics of the business and then the comparability analysis, no, as attached, no. So hahanapin na yun ng examiner. So how are you going to make documentation for related party transactions? Actually, doon pa lang kahit hindi pa ito ni-require ng BIR, is easy already require this, no? For those companies with related party transactions under PAS 24 or Philippine Accounting Standards 24, the taxpayers are already required to give information on related party transactions, and in that accounting standards, it is also defined the meaning of control, no? Kung sino yung mga related parties. No? So, how are you going to document these related party transactions? Of course, may mga contract yan, no? So, huwag tayong maniwala na walang kontrata, especially if the amount involved is already more than 500 pesos, no? May term na agreement and conditions yan na may kontrata. So, we have to show proof in the contractual terms that the payment, no, of the whatever it is in the contract of the service or of the goods should be at arm's length or at par or similar with that of the companies doing the same independent transactions, no? So dapat meron tayong comparables, no? So how do we document a segmented financial statement? Ito yung sinasabi ko during my lecture, yung mga reminders natin. Be prepared with the segmented financial statements. Why? In your recording, dapat na-segregate na yung records nyo by line of business, by kind of products, no, or services. Why? Because if you don't have the recording of those segmented information, then during the audit at hihingan kayo ng segmented information, wala kayong maibigay, no? Bakit? Kasi hindi kayo nag-maintain. Just that's why in the source pa lang during the transactions, when you make a transaction, see to it na may documentation ka na at may records ka na para hindi ka mahirapan, no? So where can you get this segmented financial statements? From your books of accounts and from your records per line of business or per branch, no? Supply chain management analysis, paano po ginagawa ito and what are the source documents? Siguro itong supply chain management analysis, this is the actual conduct of the taxpayer. So how are you going to document the actual conduct of the taxpayer? The pricing policies, the process, the agreement or the policies approved by the management or by the board of director, no? So anong mga proof mo doon? How are you going to document those proof of the board of director? Yung approval nila, no? For the supplies, for the how the supplies are being produced and distributed, no? So it's the prerogative of the management or the board of directors. So are you going to document those prerogatives? Their MANCOM meetings or the board of directors meeting, no? Because lahat yun dapat naka-record, no? Okay, so that's for supply chain management analysis. Actually, paano ginagawa ito? In the form of the diagram, no? From the moment the goods is being produced and then distribute na siya and then napunta na siya sa consumer, no? Napunta na sa retailer, and the relationship of those chain, no? Chain of the business transactions from the manufacturer, sino nag-produce, no? Is it produced by a related party? And then, sino nag-distribute so that it will reach the consumer, the distributor? Is the distributor is already or also a related party, no? If yes, dapat arm's length ang pricing, no? And then we have the functions, assets and risk analysis, or the FAR analysis. So how are you going to document the function? Siyempre yung functions, unang-una, that's why favorite talaga natin when we do transfer pricing analysis report. Because favorite talaga natin yung financial statement. Why? Kasi nandiyan lahat ng information na kailangan natin. No? So, ano yung functions natin? Halimbawa, manufacturing, halimbawa, distributor, retailer. Saan yan nakalagay? Sa mga permits mo of compliance with the regulatory agencies. No? Kung halimbawa, financing ka, yung registration mo with the central bank, no? Halimbawa, kung anong klase yun ng functions mo, anong ginagawa mo, you must be registered with the proper regulatory agencies, no? So, halimbawa, hospital ka, register ka dapat sa DOH, no? Department of Health. Halimbawa, school ka, register ka rin dapat sa DepEd or sa CHED, no? So, yun po yung ating sinasabi na functions. How about assets? How do we document these assets? Of course, assets are being purchased, no? And when we purchase, how do we value the assets? At cost, no? So, saan natin makikita yung documentation ng assets? On the time na pinurchase niya. So, ano yung proof? Sales invoice can be official receipt or the documents, no? The titles sa mga lupa, no? Or the receipts for the tools na mga binili halimbawa, no? That forms part of the assets. Okay, so yun yung sa assets natin. And then meron tayong tinatawag dito na lapsing schedule, di ba? Na requirement as notes to financial statement and the disclosures. So ano nakalagay po dun sa assets natin? Ito yung carrying value, no? Yung beginning value ng assets. And then you have to add the additions and then minus the disposals, minus the accumulated depreciation, then you have the carrying value at the end of the taxable period, no? So, yung assets, especially registrable assets, di tayo mahirapan dyan mag-document because mandatory po ang documentations of the registrable assets. Why? Because for those registrable assets at wala po kayong registration, wala kayong dokumento, then it's hard to prove the ownership, no? And you cannot transfer the ownership also. We also have the risk, no? So how do we analyze the risk, no? So per industry may mga risk analysis na yan sila per industry, no? Halimbawa, money changer, ano ba ang risk ng money changer? Very risky, no? Because yung cash is vulnerable to theft, to hold up, no? Kaya pagka cash na or pera na yung negosyo ng isang taxpayer, expect mo na marami talaga ang gastos niya, major, for the securities, no? Okay, so meron tayong mga tinatawag na mga high risk, no, na industries. Okay. So how do we document the risk, no? So refer natin sa industry, no? Sa mga industry reports. Okay. Characteristic of the business, no? How do we document the characteristics of the business, no? So ano yung characteristics niya? Mahal ba siya? High priced, no? Maganda ba yung quality, no? So yun yung mga characteristics. Unique ba siya o kaya very rare, no? Kasi kung rare yan, it will command a higher price, no? And then number 6, we have the comparability analysis as attached, no? So ito na yung pinaka-transfer pricing study natin. No? Okay. So, nakalagay dito sa baba that the statement letter has been duly made and signed with full awareness and without coercion from anyone whomsoever, and I am ready to be responsible for all legal consequences arising out of this statement. No? So, lagay dito sa statement letter, no? Yung disclosures pa lang ng mga requirements, no? Okay. So, in Annex 3 naman, dito pa rin sa Ramo 1-2019, we also have the related party transactions, no? So, we have the name of the taxpayer, the TIN, the taxable year, and then the address, no? So, nakalagay dyan. And then, item number 1, the type of the transactions, whether related party siya or and then the value and amount, the transfer pricing method, and then the remarks, no? For the remarks to be filled out with information in connection with related party transactions of the taxpayer, among other things, no? Country of counterpart and reasons for selection of methods, no? Common expenses shared by related companies. Ano tong common expenses shared by related companies? Shared expenses, no? Ito yung mga intra-group services. Okay. So, we'll start with item number 1, no? This is the related party transactions. So, what are the type of the transactions? That is provided in column 2. And then we have the related party, column 3, the value and the amount, and then the transfer pricing method, no? So, item number 1, sale of goods, sale of services, sale of raw materials, sale of capital goods, no? So, binenta. And then we have the PPE or the property, plant and equipment, purchase of goods, services, and raw materials and capital goods, no? So, nag-purchase. Number 2 is the delivery, utilization of intangible property, no? So, meron na siyang hinahanap na intangible property, no? So, right now, di ba, preparation po ng income tax return natin, no? Ang dami kong na-review ng mga financial statements of the client. Anong ginawa ko? Pinapabalik ko at pinapalagyan ko ng intangible assets, no? Saan natin ilalagay yung intangible assets? Saan sila i-classify? Sa other non-current assets, no? Doon natin ilagay. At ano po yung laman ng ating intangibles? Ito yung mga properties natin na hindi sila nakikita, no? Kasi kaya nga intangibles, no physical characteristics, but they are very expensive, no? Because some intangibles are developed over time, and then ano pa yung mga characteristics ng intangibles. So, anong ginawa ko doon sa mga pinabalik ko na wala silang intangibles? Why? Because pharmaceutical company sila, may mga patent sila na product, patented na products, may mga license sila, no? So, hindi na recognized as an intangibles, no? So, anong ginawa natin? Pina-account natin talaga yung intangibles at saka binalyo natin sa ating balance sheet, no? As other non-current assets. So, under non-current assets, we have the intangibles. Ano yung laman pa ng intangibles? We have the mga license, no? Or franchise, they are also intangibles. Mga patents, trademark. Kaya hindi kayo maniniwala na or papayag na ang ginagawang financial statement walang intangibles. Software, the computer software are considered as intangibles. Kaya nga, wag maniwala na walang intangibles, no? Kung hindi pa nagawa in previous years, lagyan po natin ng intangibles, and then magkano yung ating valuation, no? So, ang intangibles, halimbawa, patent siya, and then the life of the patent is 20 years. After 20 years, mag-off patent siya. Then, how are you going to value your intangibles, no? So, of course, it should be valued at present value. At saka, ang intangibles, kung acquired mo siya at cost or dinevelop mo siya, kagaya na halimbawa through research and development, then you have to consider the cost, no? So, kung binili mo naman siya, then you have to consider the purchase price. Okay, so delivery or utilization of intangible property. If in case na niyo-utilize mo yung intangible property, no? Okay. So how are you going to document, no? We're talking of documentation. How are you going to document the intangibles, no? Halimbawa, meron kayong patent and that patent is registered with the IP or the Intellectual Property Office. Then, pwede na ninyong lagyan yan, estimate lang ng future ninyo na income because of that intangibles, no? Okay. Intercompany loan and advances, no? Between related parties, you have to value at the amount. Hindi nga nilagay dito na magkano yung interest, no? Kasi, pag may intercompany loan and advances, no, hahanapin yan siya, no? So, between related parties, so ilagay nyo dyan, no? And then the amount, no? And then you have the transfer pricing method, no? So, payment for services, no? Are the types of transactions. So, payment for services for the related party, the amount, and then the transfer pricing method, no? And then we have the delivery, acquisition of financial instrument such as shares and bonds, no? Yan, may mga certificates yan, kaya madali lang yan i-document. And then the shared expenses, no? So, for the shared expenses to be common expenses shared by related parties. Yan. Kasi may mga common yan, especially kung sa isang building lang kayo, no? Kung may mga common expenses dyan. Okay. And then we have the common expenses shared by related parties. Okay. Okay, so it should be signed by the taxpayer or representative, and you have to put the date, no? May viewers pa rin tayo? Ilan?
6 viewers.
Okay. So, we have now the Annex 4 on the segmented financial statement. So, how do we segmentize our financial statements, no? So, in this Annex 4 segmented financial statements, we have here the item, no? And then the transactions, and then the amount, the related party, the independent party, the amount, direct or indirect segmentation, or the remarks, no? So, we have here the sale, less cost of sales, equals gross profit. So, you have now the gross profit rates, and then the general and administrative cost, net operating income, operating margins, other revenues, other cost, profits before tax, sale, no? And then the related party transactions, no? So, you have to disclose lahat. Kaya nga sabi ko sa source document yung pa lang, when you record, no, your expenses, yung day-to-day recording natin na bookkeeping, then you have to be prepared for the segmented financial statement or for the segmented information. Okay. No, so ano pa yung item, no? We have the transactions, no? Purchase from related parties, no? We also have loan from related parties. No? So you have the interest, income, at saka expense. No? Letter D, services to related party. No? So royalty or license fee to related party in connection with manufacturing. Okay. Royalty or license fee to related parties in connection with marketing. And we have other costs to related party. And then we have the total related party transactions. No? Okay. May nilagay siya dito na example. Example, royalty cost of company A in year 2016 is PHP 1,000 million, 1 billion, no? With respect to the cost company A allocates to independent transaction entirely, no? Meanwhile, related party transaction does not obtain allocation of royalty cost, no? So nawala siya ng cost. Then column 4 filled out with 1 million, whereas column 5 is filled out with kulang with 0, no? PHP 0. Okay. So yun po yung example niya. And then we have the Annex 5, the supply chain management analysis, no? So how are you going to make a supply chain management analysis? Gagawa lang po tayo ng parang flow chart, no? Kung saan nag-uumpisa yung product, and then paano siya na-distribute, and paano po nakarating sa end user or the consumer. Okay. Okay. And then we have our Annex 6, no? The functions, assets, and risk analysis, no? And then the FAR analysis. No, ano yung FAR analysis? Yan po yung functions, assets, and risk, no? So, this Annex 6, meron siyang information required for functions, assets, and risk, no? So we have the functions, assets, and risk. We have the taxpayer, the name of related party, name of other party, and then the remarks, no? So for the functions, we have purchase of raw materials, no? So selection of supplier, no? So nandyan, anong nakalagay dito sa selection of the supplier, no? So sinong may gawa niyan? The taxpayer, the name of the related party. Itong mga annexes na to, ang hinahanap dito related parties. That's why, pag nag-fill up din kayo ng BR Form 1709, be sure that what you have in your mind are the transactions between related parties, no? Huwag kayong lalayo, basta pag sinabi transfer pricing, related parties po yan. Financial and commercial transactions, no? So, what is the name of the related party? The name of the other party, kung meron pang hindi related party involved, no? And then the remarks, yung explanation mo. So, for the function and assets and risk on the purchase of raw materials, no? Yung scheduling, paano nila ini-schedule, the supervision on quality of material. Bakit may quality of material? Kasi siyempre gawin mo raw materials yan, pagka defective, then defective din yung product mo, malulugi ka. So very important yung quality of the materials. Purchase of imported material. Kanino mo pinurchase? Sa taxpayer, sa related party, or sa other party, no? Then the remarks. And then you have the purchase of local material, kasi may imported din. So kanino mo siya pinurchase, no? And then the distribution of imported material, no? Paano distribute? Kasi halimbawa, you have one company, which is related company, in charge of importation, no? So paano niya dinispose or dinistribute along with other related parties? And then the negotiation of prices of imported material, no? Negotiation of prices of local materials. Sino yung gumawa niyan, no? And then the owner of raw materials. Sino? Is it a related party? Ang init na hari, i-on mo sandali ito, no? And then the letter B, no? Kasi yung A is purchase. Yung letter B, consignment of raw materials. Why? Kasi sometimes hindi pinopurchase yung material, sometimes kino-consign, no? And then we have the owner of raw materials, no? Sino yung owner ng raw materials na kinonsign natin? And then the person in charge of procurement ng raw materials. We have party who bears risk of increase in prices of raw materials. Kasi sometimes fluctuating yung prices, no? So sino yung magsasuffer kung tataas yung raw materials, no? Contract of procurement ng raw materials. And then the others, kung meron pa, no? And then letter C, the research and development, no? Fundamental research. Sino ba? Yung taxpayer, the related party, the other party. And then the collection of information, the research and development of products, the determination of design of the product, determination of application of products, no? Ano to? Manufacturing, total manufacturing, development of product, development of malabo na, no? Hindi makikita. And then we have the buksan mo hari sa page ng RMO 1-2019.
Anong page?
Sa Annex 6 na siya. Para makita nila. Annex 6. Number, page 2. No? So, we have our functions, assets, and risks. We're talking about functions, assets, and risks. Why? Because sa comparability, napaka-importante po ng functions, assets, and risks. Why? Kasi sa functions, pag nag-iba na yung functions ng isang company, marami ng pagbabago sa kanya, no? Pati na yung pricing ng kanyang product, no? So, magbabago na rin. And then we have the improvement of efficiency of the manufacturer, no? So, nandyan. And then we have the bearer of risk of inefficiency of production line. And then we have the improvement of production line. And then letter E, production process or processing, no? Producing products, product scheduling, products design, packaging and labeling, no? Improvement of products produced, collection of information of products of competitor, no? So pagka gumagawa kayo ng transfer pricing documentation, you can make use of this assured kind, no? Assembly and packing. We have party who assemble products sold, no? And party who conduct packing, no? Or yung gumagawa ng packaging. Kasi sometimes they are all related parties. And then we have warehousing in logistics, no? Party who supervises stocks of finished products, no? Party who works, who stores stocks of finished products, no? Then the stipulation of sale price, party who performs price negotiation, party who determines sale price, no? So, naka-identify talaga dito. Kaya makikita mo kaagad kung sino yung mga related parties na yan, no? And then we have the invoicing collection. Party who issues sales invoice, party who perform collection, party who bears risk of uncollectible receivables. Dito sa invoicing, meron na tayong mga na-discuss na transfer pricing case dito at saka yung mga anong nangyari no sa invoicing, because there can be potential transfer pricing issues that will be happening or will crop up during the invoicing. At anong case po yun? Yung na-discuss natin about split invoicing that happens in the Coca-Cola case. Di ba yung split invoicing doon is that yung Coca-Cola, ini-split niya yung invoice na ito yung related company, siya yung may-ari ng inventories, siya yung nagbebenta dapat, pero in-split niya sa ibang company na wala namang participation doon sa ownership ng inventory at hindi naman din party to that transactions, no? In-split nila yung invoicing. Okay. So, next is the marketing, advertising, and promotion, no? So, we have market analysis, no? Market research, market penetration, no? Di na, malabo. No? Okay. So, tingnan nyo na lang yung ramo na to. No? And then we have the functions, assets, and the risk. We have the quality control. We have testing, quality of products. No? Troubleshooting. Xerox, ito bakit nawawala? Itong pinrint natin. Sobrang labo. Hindi mo na makita. Okay. So, we have the sale and distribution, no? So, sa sale and distribution, we have prices negotiation, receiving order from customers. Sino yung nagre-receive? Kasi, bakit inisa-isa dito? These are functions, no? So, kaya nga, inihingi ko yung ginagawa kong mga transfer pricing analysis ngayon. Hinihingi ko sa kanila yung process flow ng kanilang mga services or yung kanilang business activities, no? So, sale and distribution, we have the price negotiation, receiving order from customers, sale administration, sales personnel, signing of sale contracts, product distribution or delivery, transportation cost, guarantor. No? And then, we have others. No? Human research and development, general and administration, after sales services, we have product guarantee, no? Receiving claims against the product, transportation, management, finance. And for the assets, we have the intangible assets. No? So, take note po na very, very important ang intangible assets when it comes to transfer pricing. Kaya, halimbawa, sabihin nyo, ay wala po kaming intangibles. No? And then you are a manufacturing company. Misrepresented na po kaagad yung inyong financial statement. Why? Kasi, as manufacturing company, you are manufacturing ang product with a logo, with a process na patented sa IPO. So, ibig sabihin, hindi nyo binavalue yung intangibles. Kaya, ngayong filing na to, ang dami kong sa review no, ng financial statements, ulit ko sa taxpayer, no, sa client, yung kanilang financial statements to value, to disclose the intangible assets. No? Kasi ang dami nating intangible assets. Ano yung example ng intangible assets? We have the patents, copyrights, yung mga labels natin, brands, no? And then the processes. Those are all intangibles. Owner of know-how in connection with production, no? Sino yung may-ari ng know-how? Sino yung may-ari ng secret formula, no? Yung case ng Coke, ano nangyari doon sa case ng Coke? Bakit sila na-assess, no? Because yung owner ng Coke na siya yung may-ari ng intangibles. Kaya very important yung intangibles eh. Bakit? Kasi yung determination ng payment, no? Sa functions, assets, and risks. Sino ba yung may-ari ng intangibles, no? Nandoon sa US. So, bakit yung may-ari ng intangibles, mas malaki pa yung other company na in-establish nila sa Latin America, no? Nandoon yung payment na something like hanggang 280% yung kanila gross profit. Samantalang ang yung owner mismo ng intangible, maliit lang. So, hindi siya properly compensated. So, anong ginawa ng IRS, no, na US? Pina-adjust yung profit. Yung profit na dinala nila doon sa ibang bansa, kinuha yon at in-adjust, doon itatax sa US. Why? Kasi siya yung may-ari ng intangibles. Huh? So, these intangibles are very, very important. So, yung owner of know-how in connection with production. Kasi siya yung owner ng know-how eh. Okay. The patent of product owner. No? So, sino yung product owner? Yung patent, diniregister po yan sa IPO, sa Intellectual Property Office. So, those registered owner, no, ng patent. License of know-how, no? Ito na yung license ng know-how na ila-license mo siya yung paggawa ng product mo, pag-manufacture ng product mo. Kasama na yung know-how na ila-license mo kasi gagawa sila ng produkto na kagayang-kagaya ng produkto mo, no? So nila-license mo sila. And then we have the trademark owner, no? Very important yung trademark because it distinguishes the product from other products. And then the license of trademark because halimbawa mga logo ipagamit mo sa iba so magla-license sila sa iyo. That license agreement babayaran yung may-ari ng royalty, no? Kaya dito sa ginagawa natin na to speaking of transfer pricing is very very particular on your income tax, no? So patayin mo na yung Hari, aircon, sakit na sa mata. No? So in this transfer pricing, the tax authority is very particular about the income tax. No? So, nakalagay dito license of trademark. Kung pinapagamit mo siya sa iba, then there should be a contract para sa licensing ng trademark. And there should be, in that contract, to make it enforceable, there should be payment for the royalty. No? And then, sa mga dispute resolution sa intangibles, nandiyan na yung determination ng payment ng royalty. No? And then, the party giving contribution to development of intangibles, no? For example, brand, no? And then, the ownership of intangible assets economically. Sino yung economic owner? Sino yung economic owner? Napunta lahat sa kanya yung pera. Sino naman yung legal owner? Wala lang, pinangalan lang sa kanya. Hindi siya nakikinabang. No? Kaya tingnan nyo ngayon, even in is easy, no? Pinapadisclose na doon sa mga companies who are the legal owners and who are the beneficial owner. No? And then we have the tangible assets, no? So sino yung owner ng tangible assets? Why? Kasi sometimes, no, during the examinations, yung company will claim ownership of the assets when in fact it is in the name of the stockholders. No? So in that case, hindi po yan pwede. And then we have the owner of production facilities, no? Kasi sometimes related parties sila, ang manufacturer is the related party or subsidiary. The owner of the production facility is the parent company. And the parent company, let the subsidiary use the facility at no cost, no rental whatsoever. No? So in that case, that is not arm's length. Kasi ano dapat? Sabi natin, arm's length principle, yung related party transactions, same with independent party transactions. So, halimbawa na lang ginamit mo yung facilities ng iba, hindi mo parent company. Magkano niya kaya ipapaupa yung facilities, no? So, dapat ganun din pag-recognize. Kahit na parent and subsidiary sila, you have to recognize the rental, no? For the use of the property. Owner of production facilities, no? Hindi na maintindihan, no? Tingnan nyo na lang yung 1-2019. Owner of stocks, no? And then we have the risk. Ano naman yung nakalagay dito sa risk, no? Ano tong mga risk? Ito yung mga danger, ito yung mga threat doon sa transactions. So, number 1, under risk, party who bears the risk, the research and development risk, no? Bakit napaka-importante po ng research and development risk? Because for the research and development, you are spending for the development of the new product, no? So when that research and development will not be successful, who will bear the risk of losing the investment, no? Kasi halimbawa, you spend 10 million for the research and development of a new software, no? So hindi siya na develop. So who will suffer the risk of losing the 10 million? Siyempre yung gumastos, no? So party who bears research and development risk. Party who bears financial risk, no? So sino yung halimbawa failure to collect, no? Yung receivable. Sino yung party who bears the financial risk or who will suffer kung hindi magbabayad yung collectibles, no? Party who bears risk of imported raw materials, no? Sino yung maapektuhan sa imported na raw materials? And we have also the party who bears the risk of local raw materials, no? Okay. Party who bears the risk in efficiency of production line. Party who bears the risk of schedule of production, no? Kasi yung schedule of production very important po 'yan sa mga manufacturing companies, no? For anong tinitingnan nila dito. Hindi sila ma-overstock at saka hindi expire yung mga products, no? Party who bears risk of failure of production, no? Party who bears market risk, no? Siyempre, kung sino yung may-ari ng inventory for sale, sila yung party who bears market risk, no? Party who bears investment loss, party who bears stock risk, party who bears risk of exchange rate or of the foreign currency, and then party who bears risk of damage to products and guarantee, no? Party who bears risk of uncollectible receivable. So, this form, fill upan po ito ng taxpayer or ng client, no? And then, sinasubmit po ito sa BIR, no? Okay, pagka na-accomplish mo to, madali na lang sa examiner mag-evaluate, no? Ng mga transfer pricing cases. That's why itong Ramo 1-2019, this is really used to help the examiners, no? And then we have the Annex 7 characteristics of business, no? So, ano yung mga example dito na characteristics of business? Fully fledged manufacturing, no? Contract manufacturing, toll manufacturing. So, anong pagkakaiba po? Pag fully fledged manufacturing ka, at saka pagka-contract manufacturing ka, at saka toll manufacturing ka. In my other videos, pinakita ko na sa inyo at papaano ginawa ng client or ng business owner na makikinabang siya dito on business restructuring, no? Halimbawa, binago mo yung fully fledged manufacturing, ginawa mo na lang siyang contract manufacturing, and o kaya ginawa mo toll manufacturing, no? So, what happen doon sa risk? Sino na ngayon yung bear ng risk, no? Kasi dito sa change ng functions, also the risk, no? The assumption of risk, ano din siya, affected, no? And then we have the limited risk distributor, We have the commissioner, the commission agent, and then the service provider. No? So, ito yung characteristics ng business. No? Actually, marami pa to. No? Sa others yung na lang ilagay. Marami pa to. These are not all inclusive. No? Marami pang mga characteristics ng business na wala dito. Okay. So this statement letter has been properly and duly made to be followed up in accordance with the applicable laws. No? So, we also have the comparability analysis. No, ang haba niyan, Annex 8. No? And then we have the Annex 9, yung supplemental letter. No? Then we have the Annex 10, minutes of provision of information on taxpayer in respect of affiliated transactions. No? Okay. Dito sa second and final notice to give information or related transactions, ito yung Annex 9. Ano yung nakalagay dito na to give information, explanation, and presentation to tax examiner team. No? So in connection with number 1, characteristics of industry and market where company carries on business. No? So very important yung characteristic na industry and market. Kagaya yung may ginagawa ako na yung involved in financial services, no? Yung mga pera. No? So ano yung characteristic na industry and then the market? Very risky, very volatile or masyadong magalaw, no? And then characteristics of related party transactions ng company. So ano yung mga related party transactions ng company? No? Saan to makikita? Saan ko kinukuha siya? No? Kasi we're talking of documentation. Saan ko siya kinukuha? Sa disclosures to financial statements. No? And then we have the characteristic of company as part of the group. And then characteristics of taxpayer business, the transfer pricing method used, comparable used in applying arm's length principle to affiliated transactions, and then the determination of fair prices or profits of related party transactions, no? And others. Okay. So ito namang minutes of provision or Annex 10 ng of taxpayer in respect of affiliated transactions. No? So we have here the name of employee, designation, then the position. No? So pursuant to letter authority dated blank, have asked for information on related party transactions in accordance with letter dated blank to name, occupation, position, and then the address. No? So in this case, acting as taxpayers or authorized representative of the taxpayer. No? Okay, so with the explanation attached. Okay. So yun po yung mga annexes pa lang yun sa documentation ng Ramo 1-2019, no? So tingnan niyo yan and then may mga column na pag-reproduce ninyo para may guide kayo, doon na kayo mag-check, no? Doon na kayo mag-fill up. Okay? So, before I proceed to the yung ating case, no? Break lang po tayo sandali. Anong tawag dito? Hari, ilang minutes na tayo?
1 hour 15 minutes.
Okay. Sige, so discuss natin. Last part na to eh. Nung ating case
May
study.
shoutout pala tayo.
Oh, sige, shout out.
Shoutout po kay Sir Rams Madrid.
Si Rams, how are you? Kumuha na yata siya ng CPA board, no? Tuloy na ba yung CPA board, no? Good luck.
Good evening daw po, ma'am.
Okay, so good evening. Sige, shout out.
Shoutout po kay Sir Rams Madrid.
Si Rams, how are you? Kumuha na yata siya ng CPA board, no? Tuloy na ba yung CPA board, no? Good luck.
Good evening daw po, ma'am.
Okay, so let's continue with our discussion on the case, no, on pharmaceutical AS versus the Eastern High Court of Denmark. And what is this case all about? This case is about a pharmaceutical company na nag-claim po sila ng goodwill, no, sa kanilang companies na for how many years na nagkaroon sila ng merger, ng consolidation, and then may kinikerry sila na account in the books ng mga merged companies, no? So, meron silang 913 million na goodwill. And then, pagdating na doon sa nag-consolidate sila doon sa isang transaction nila, no, na nag-merge na naman yung ibang companies, kiniri over nila yung 913 million na goodwill, and then inamortize nila as part of the operating expense, no? Kasi kinlaim nila as inamortize nila, dinepreciate nila yung goodwill, no? For 16 years. And that amounted to 57 million. Ang init, hari. Buksan mo ulit. Buksan mo tapos buksan mo muna yung pintuan doon. Kasi parang ang sakit ng init, no? Sa dulo. Isara mo yung Isara mo yung CR. Yan, no? Napakainit po ngayon. Sobra. Okay. So, let's now go to the case, no? Ito na yung last portion natin kasi let us see kung papaano ginamit yung documentation sa case, no? During the trial of the case, no? So, ito yung mga nangyari dito, no? There is a goodwill in the transfer pricing documentation. And then tinanong nila dito, yung CPA that prepares the financial statements, hindi rin niya ma-explain, no? Masyado. So, what happened in this case? Kaya nga, ako very careful ako ngayon pag gumagawa ng transfer pricing analysis report. I see to it, no? Na lahat ng information about the company dinidisclose ko. Kasi ang hirap na you are the ones doing the transfer pricing analysis at ang daming mga information about the companies na hindi mo alam, no? Tingnan mo ang nangyari dito, yung CPA na nag-prepare ng financial statements, hindi niya ma-explain, no? Yung transfer pricing documentation na ginawa niya, no? Hindi niya ma-explain kung bakit nandoon yung sa operating expenses ang amortization ng goodwill. Why? Because amortization of goodwill is not an ordinary expense, no? So, bakit nandoon siya sa operating expenses? Okay. So, ito yung nangyari, no? Meron silang transfer pricing documentation which was prepared in 2011 and covers the year 2006 and onwards. Ang period covered in this adjustment, no, in these findings ng court is 2006 to 2010, no? So there was a transfer pricing documentation prepared in 2011 na covers the years 2006 and onwards, no? So when it was stated in the transfer pricing documentation for 2006 on amortization of goodwill. So anong sabi daw doon? Not an operating expense as such. Oh, so sinasabi nila doon sa transfer pricing documentation na yung goodwill is not an operating expense. Pero kiniklaim nila as an operating expense. Then it is an expression that it is not an operating cost, as if one wears on a machine that at some point will be worn down. When the same place is stated and that the goodwill amortization is not deductible, it means that the company's tax result is greater than the company result, no? So, however, the tax status of the goodwill amortization was irrelevant. Yan ang sabi sa, yun ang sabi dun sa transfer pricing documentation. So, it was necessary to deduct the amortization of goodwill in order to be able to compare A with the selected comparison companies. What you do with all benchmarking is to make your accounting figures as comparable as possible with the benchmark used, no? So, yan ang sabi nila about transfer pricing. Bakit? Kasi totoo din naman na if you are doing a transfer pricing analysis, then you have to choose your comparables because sabi ng OECD, hindi naman lahat ng comparables na nandyan or market players na kagaya mo, ilagay mo lahat sila, i-choose mo as comparables. Of course, subjective din ang paggawa ng transfer pricing documentation or analysis. Why? Kasi siyempre ang piliin mo naman when you benchmark yung favorable sa iyo, no? So the comparison companies were selected in a database, no? He was not himself involved in selecting the companies. So he cannot say whether in that connection it was examined whether the comparison companies had activated or not activated goodwill. Sino itong na sinasabi nila? Ito yung accountant po ng company, no? So the benchmark analyses were available in the group. They were not prepared for use in the case, no? So pinrepare lang siya para sa group, no? He found it natural to disregard amortization of goodwill as one could have chosen to submit accounts in accordance with international standards where one had to make deductions for goodwill, no? Ano yung international standards? Hindi mo pwedeng i-deduct yung goodwill, no? Kasi yung goodwill, di ba nire-recognize lang yan pagka nabenta na yung company. Pero kung during the operation, it's not an operating expense. So in that case, goodwill would have been retained in the account at cost, no? Kung magkano mo binili yung goodwill, i-maintain mo lang siya at cost. Okay. The price adjustments that occurred during a year were not prompted by the auditor's comments in the various audit protocols. Kaya alam nyo, very careful talaga yung auditor, no? Kasi hindi ka lang basta audit, una lang ng audit. You see to it that proper accounting standards are applied, no? Kasi pag hindi, tapos ikaw yung auditor, ikaw yung nagbigay ng opinion, kagaya nitong case na to, ipapatawag ka rin ng korte, no? And then you have to explain. At endanger yung license mo. It was driven internally by a desire to achieve a 70-30 distribution. He has also prepared an impairment test in 2018. It showed goodwill in the group corresponding to a few 100 million, no? In impairment. Procedure, no? So in support of the principal claim, the Minister of Taxation has argued that it is A and B who have the burden of proof that the amortization of goodwill made in the comparability analysis must be disregarded. Kasi, ang sabi nila, yung pag-claim daw ng taxpayer, na ang pag-claim daw ng goodwill must be disregarded. Ayaw nilang mag-adjust, no? So in this connection, the Ministry of Taxation has referred to the fact that the related parties must calculate prices and terms for the intragroup transactions in the calculation of their taxable income, which correspond to the prices and terms that independent parties would set for similar transactions. And that is applying the arm's length principle, no? Prices and terms between related parties cannot be taken for granted, of course. And Section 2 of the Tax Assessment Act, therefore, authorizes a correction access for the tax authorities so that the controlled transactions are brought to arm's length level. So, yun yung purpose. Paano mong gawin na arm's length level na siya? So, kung ano yung transaction between the related parties, hanap ka ng comparables na independent parties na ganyan ang ginagawa nila on that same transaction. No? So, ibig sabihin, mag-compare ka. However, the transfer pricing documentation that A and B were obliged to prepare in accordance with the Section 3B of the Tax Control Act does not prove that action was taken on arm's length terms. Diyan nga ako namang problema na pag-prepare mo pa lang ng transfer pricing analysis, hindi na arm's length yung makikita mo, no? So, anong gagawin mo? You recommend to the management. And then you cannot issue report or conclusion na arm's length nga sila, no? So, anong gagawin mo? You have to recommend for them to adjust. Okay. So, on the contrary, this documentation shows that A's prices and terms and thus results were not on arm's length terms and thus not in accordance with Section 2 of the Tax Assessment Act. No? It is A who has prepared the transfer pricing documentation. No? Si A, siya yung accountant. No? Siya yung nag-prepare ng transfer pricing documentation, including the comparability analysis which should show that the company had observed the arm's length principle. The comparability analysis is a key part of the company's documentation that trading took place on arm's length terms. Actually, yung transfer pricing documentation is a documentation in itself, yung paggawa mo ng transfer pricing analysis, no? So this analysis showed that A's income differed significantly from the income of companies that did not have extensive intragroup trading, no? So iba yung income ni A, malayo doon sa ibang mga companies, no? Na walang intragroup trading. A was therefore forced to improve its results to be within the calculated benchmark, no? And the company did so in particular by disregarding the significant ordinary amortization of goodwill of Denmark Kron 57,101,000 annually in connection with the calculation of the company's adjusted operating margin. So, pina-adjust na kanya, tinanggal yung 57 million na claim nila o dinideduct nila as depreciation ng goodwill. No? So, burden of proof. The Ministry of Taxation agrees that in principle, it is the tax authorities who must demonstrate that no action has been taken on arms and terms pursuant to Section 2 of the Tax Assessment Act when the taxpayer has prepared the statutory transfer pricing documentation. No? However, in a case such as the present, where a company removes cost to bring its result within its benchmark, it is the company that must prove that there was a basis for removing the cost. No? It is A was chosen to use the T&M method, and it is A was selected the companies to be compared with. Against this background, it is incumbent on A and B to prove that it was necessary to disregard the significant goodwill amortization because this leads to a significantly increased comparability, and this has not been substantiated. No? So, yan ang findings. So, when crucial assumption in the company's comparability analysis is not tenable, Scott was entitled to make a correction that ensures that the company's transactions are brought to arm's length. Sino itong Scott? Siya itong tax authority. Scott could rightly have challenged the company's use of the T&M method as it was not suitable when the company under test has taxable persistent deficits and possesses the unique and valuable intangible assets. No? So Scott focused instead on A, ignoring the significant cost of amortization of goodwill in order to get within the benchmark and the reason for this. No? So dinisregard lang nila yung amortization of goodwill. So the original justification given in the transfer pricing documentation that the amortization of goodwill was not an operating expense as such, no? So, sino yung nagbigay ng justification sa transfer pricing documentation, no? So, yung gumawa din. No? At ano yung sabi niya? Siya na mismo nagsabi na yung amortization ng goodwill is not an operating expense, no? So, pag hindi siya operating expense, anong gagawin mo? Hindi mo siya i-consider. So, tataas ngayon yung net income mo, no? So, kasi ang ginamit niya dito, net income, dahil transactional net margin method. No? Okay. So, original justification given in the transfer pricing documentation that the amortization of goodwill was not an operating expense as such, was not tenable, and A and B have therefore raised new pleas in law during the tax proceedings in support of the need to see away from depreciation. No? However, the new pleas do not lead to a different result. Ano yung different result? Favor dito sa tax authorities. No? First, A realized significant deficits in 2006 to 2010. Dati hindi siya deficit. Nung nag-claim na sila ng goodwill, nag-deficit na siya. No? It not go badly in the group nor in the industry. No? So yun na yun. Kaya very important, ang transfer pricing is economic taxation. Very important that you study also the economic condition. That's why in every study that we have, may economic condition talaga na explanation. No? So it has the presumption against it that an independent third party would continue a loss-making operations. Kaya tingnan nyo sa disclosure pala ng 1709 kasama na yung mga net loss doon. No? With unchanged price and terms for such a long period of time. No? So, on the other hand, there is a presumption that a distributor such as A, who is engaged in the sale of generic medicines and who has a very significant goodwill asset, will make a profit. A and B have not documented that these deficits were due to exceptional circumstances. No? Secondly, A's own impairment test show that the company's results in 2006 to 2010 did not live up to the required rate of return that they, according to their own statement, should have achieved in the disputed income years, namely 7%. No? So it thus appears from the information in the case that there were very significant discrepancies between the established and realized margin. No? So, magkaiba. Okay. Third, the T&M method, ito yung transactional net margin method, is a net method. No? Net na siya. Tanggal na yung operating expenses, no? Sa gross profit. Net result of controlled transaction, which is then compared with the net result of an uncontrolled transaction. So precisely because it is a comparison of net results, then the method is less sensitive to different functions and accounting principles, no? Including difference in operating and capacity cost, no? Which appears from the legal guide 2019-2, section CDU 11.4.1.4, and the OECD's transfer pricing guidelines 2010, no? Thereafter TPG, no? Transfer pricing guidelines. Once the company has chosen to use the T&M method, it therefore takes a lot, no, to correct for an operating related cost, no? So fourthly, the changing and new views, partly about the presence of goodwill, partly about the reason why goodwill amortization should be disregarded, mean that the burden of proof must be sharpened, no? Kasi sabi nila, hindi na daw material na i-disallow mo yung claim nila ng goodwill as an expense, no? Goodwill as an operating expense, no? So, ang ganda nito. Ginawa kasi ng taxpayer na operating expense yung goodwill, no? As regard A's original reason for disregarding the cost of amortizing goodwill, it appeared from A's transfer pricing documentation that the cost had been disregarded on the ground that, no? Ito na, bakit daw din disregard yung cost ng goodwill. The amortization of accounting goodwill is accordingly not an operating expense as such, and it is not deductible for tax purposes. So, yun po yung reason, no? Hindi talaga siya deductible for tax purposes. Whether the cost is deductible or not is irrelevant to whether it should be disregarded when compared with other companies' earnings. This part of the justification has not been asserted during the tax case either. It is noted in this connection that the reason why the depreciation could not be deducted for tax purposes was that the depreciation was established by a tax-free merger. No? Saan ba nanggaling yun? Sa books nung ilang beses sila nag-merge. No? Central to the original justification is thus the statement that the accounting amortization of goodwill does not have the character of an operating expense as such, not an operating expense as such, no? So it appears from the explanatory memorandum that A regarded the accounting amortization of goodwill as an operating expense, but simply not as such, no? So, parang sa ano pa, yung sa opinion pa, parang negative pregnant, no? Na inaamin niya na yung goodwill is not an operating expense, pero i-treat mo siya na operating expense, no? Okay. Parang hindi niya inako na nakabuntis siya, pero nabuntis talaga, ano? So parang case yan no, ng negative pregnant. So ito yung nangyari dito, na yung amortization ng goodwill, sabi niya, is not an operating expenses, but still not as such, no? So parang magulo yung explanation. So in the transfer pricing documentation, A has stated the following in the previous action. Adjustments are made for non-operating expenses and extraordinary items in the accounts in order to achieve reliable comparability. So ano adjustments mo? Since ang goodwill is not an operating expense, then it is non-operating expenses, no? An extraordinary item. So hindi siya deductible for tax purposes. Ginawa nila yung 913 million na goodwill, inamortize nila ng 16 years at the annual amount of 57 million. No? So, anong nangyari doon sa net income nila? Puro na net loss. No? So, the transfer pricing documentation hereby refers to TPG 2010. No? Shows. Ito yung nandun sa transfer pricing documentation. Yung nakalagay doon. Non-operating items such as interest income and expense and income taxes should be excluded from the determination of the net profit indicator. No? Exceptional and ordinary items of a non-recurring nature should generally also be excluded. So, sila mismo, kaya nga yung reason dito ng court nanggagaling din sa kanilang documentation. These costs are in nature of items in the income statement that appears after the operating profit, no? Or after EBIT, earnings before interest and taxes. Whereas, depreciation is included before operating profit. No? So, pag in-include mo siya before operating profit, affected yung tax mo. No? An income statement also includes cost in the form of depreciation. No? Section 49 of the current Danish Financial Statements Act, and costs are defined in accordance with Appendix 1 of the Danish Financial Statements Act as decrease in financial benefits during the financial period in the form of disposal of impairment of assets. Amortization of goodwill is thus included in the income statement as an operating expense similar to expenses for purchase of goods, personnel, and depreciation on machinery and equipment. Pero mo, yung amortization of goodwill na extraordinary, sinama nila as an ordinary expense. No? ACE accounts included the amortization of goodwill as cost in the income statement year after year, on an equal footing with personnel cost up to the calculation of profit before financial items or the EBIT, no? Earnings before income and taxes. Okay. Only then did interest income, interest expenses, and taxes follow, no? So, Transfer Pricing Guidelines 2010 does not provide a basis for disregarding goodwill amortizations, no? So, when it can be established that the reasons given in ACE own transfer pricing documentation to disregard the significant amortization of goodwill are incorrect. So, ito na yung sabi ng court. Strict requirements must be placed on the proof when it is claimed that there is nevertheless, no, several other reasons can be disregarded from the depreciation. So during the case, the Ministry of Taxation has asked A to state whether it is disputed that there was a goodwill assets that had a value at least equivalent to the book value, which has not been answered adequately. No? So, ibig sabihin lang, yung pag-claim nila ng depreciation ng goodwill, they cannot explain adequately. No? It must therefore be assumed in terms of evidence that A had goodwill at least equivalent to the one that was capitalized, which is also apparent from the impairment test performed. No? So the reasoning and result of the National Tax Tribunal is incorrect, as the decision is based on the basic misunderstanding that goodwill can be considered to be non-operating. That is, and something that does not strengthen the earnings of the operation. Yun yung goodwill. So when the goodwill was acquired by the merger per January 2006, and A and B have determined that there is such goodwill, it must be assumed that the goodwill entered into by the group itself will generate future income. No? So current depreciation is therefore the nature of an operating expense. Kasi yung goodwill, para maging operating expense siya, maklaim mo siya as an expense against income, dapat nag-generate din siya ng income. No? So goodwill in the transfer pricing documentation. With regard to A's and B's argument that goodwill amortization should be disregarded, in general, the Ministry of Taxation has argued that when a company holds a valuable intangible assets, which Here is a goodwill asset, no? The company must take such intangible assets into account by the determination of the company intragroup settlement prices so as to ensure a market return on the investment in these assets, no? Kaya investment mo yung assets kaya ka nag-invest, may return, no? Yung nangyari sa kanila 16 years na puro net loss, no? Okay. The OECD or TPG does not provide any support for disregarding cost in the present situation. So on the contrary, it appears from TPG 2010 that the assets held by the parties must be taken into account. In determining settlement prices, account must of course be taken of the assets, both tangible and intangible, held by a party to a controlled transaction. A company that operates on market terms will thus always seek to achieve the highest possible return in the market of the asset in which the company has invested. Ilang oras na tayo, Hari?
1 hour 45 minutes po.
So 15 minutes na lang, no? Kasi last na natin to eh. Although, yung iba na mga in-explain kasi dito about the comments na sa mga laws eh, no? Pero yung about the transfer pricing documentation, ito yung maganda kasi na explanation dito. Okay. No, so ito na. So paano nangyari? Okay. Okay, so in determining settlement prices, account must of course be taken of the assets, no, both tangible and intangible, held by a party for a controlled transactions. A company that operates on market terms will thus always seek to achieve the highest possible return on the market of the assets in which the company is invested, no? So against this background, if the company had acted in market-based manner, would have sought to obtain payment in order to make it valuable assets available in the form of goodwill, no? Patayin mo na yung aircon. The goodwill that appears in A's annual accounts is neither related to nor a result of capital interest, no? Including as stated by the National Tax Court, previous share acquisition between the now merged companies, no? So the capitalized goodwill will be an integral part of A's own business and an expression of the fact that G3 paid more than 900 million Danish krone to expectations for G5 A's future operation. Danish krone more for GS A5 AS company than the book values promised. This operation was per January 1, 2006, part of A, no? So a company operating on market terms would demand a return on such a significant investment, no? So yun yung independent party. Talagang magdidemand ka ng return on your investment, which A has not achieved, no? As independent company would also make sure to cover its cost in the form of depreciation. In the present case, A lost several hundred millions in the period 2006 to 2010 in goodwill. So it is hereby noted that depreciation in accounting terms precisely reflects the cost that an asset's ongoing impairment constitutes. Section 43 of the Danish Financial Statements Act. An asset is defined in Appendix 1 to the Danish Financial Statement Act as past event and from which future economic benefits are expected to flow to the company. The precondition of goodwill to represent a value and thus constitute an asset is therefore the future economic benefits are expected to flow to the company as a result of this goodwill. In other words, no financial benefits can accrue as a result of the booked goodwill if the existence of the goodwill does not affect the company's future operations. So goodwill with the comparison companies. A regards as A's and B's argument that the comparison companies had a significant non-capitalized goodwill. Kasi ang hirap maghanap ng comparables na meron din siyang goodwill, no, na ni-write o na dinepreciate. So the Ministry of Taxation has argued that it is undisputed that the companies with which A in the transfer pricing documentation had chosen to compare its results did not have any capitalized goodwill or only a negligible accounting goodwill. So ito na yung findings ng tax court, no? Kasi sa transfer pricing documentation, mag-compare ka ngayon ng transactions ng client mo with that of the independent parties. So maghanap ka ng comparables, no? So in this transfer pricing documentation na ginawa ng pharmaceutical company, the transfer pricing documentation had chosen to compare its results, no? Did not have any capitalized goodwill or only a negligible accounting goodwill, no? So yun yung kinumpare niya, no? So there is no evidence that when the transfer pricing documentation was drawn, it was a criterion for the selection of the comparators or the comparables, no? Whether or not they possessed goodwill. So after the presentation of evidence, it can be stated that this aspect was not considered. Only companies with significant above normal earnings in relation to functions, books, assets, and risks will have a very significant and valuable non-book intangible assets. Should comparable companies be found that, like the party tested, also had significant intangible assets, the search should have been aimed at companies that have a particularly high earnings in relation to the book assets. Such a search was not made with A, choose the comparison companies. No? So, hindi nila nagawa. Okay. Ilang oras na?
1 hour 52 minutes.
Okay, so 8 minutes na lang, no? So, anong nangyari dito sa sa case na to? How is this case been resolved ng court, no? So yung 2010 na adjustment walang bisa yun ng korte, pero yung prior na mga adjustment, no, pina-remand niya sa lower court for the computation, no? May ano yan, may okay. Kaya maganda itong case na to eh, no? Mayroon pa siyang background ng transfer pricing rules. Okay, ito yung i-highlight ko sa inyo, ha. Okay. The burden of proof in relation to the goodwill of the comparison companies as well as the question of documentation obligation. Ano na siya? Kasi wala namang pages ito eh. Walang page. Pero malayo na siya eh. Sige. Tanggalin mo na lang yung reading. Okay. Kasi may i-highlights na ako dito, ha. Yung burden of proof. No? May sinabi siya dito that the transfer pricing documentation must contain a number of detailed information and an explanation of why the taxpayer considered the intragroup trade to meet the arm's length requirement and which transfer pricing method is used to support this. The burden of proof then passes to the tax authorities. Kaya may transfer pricing documentation. Anong purpose? To show proof na arm's length yung pricing ng company, no? At ano yung sabi sa purpose natin sa RR 2-2013 natin para ma-justify yung pag nagkaroon na ng adjustment ano yung tax authority. So itong purpose ng transfer pricing documentation, anong sabi dito sa case na to? Must contain a number of detailed information and an explanation of why the taxpayer considers the intragroup trade to meet the arm's length requirement and which transfer pricing method is used to support this. So, ibig sabihin lang, mag-recommend ka na ng transfer pricing method used in comparing the analysis, no? In comparing the functions, assets, or risk ng company. No? Kasi magko-compare ka. And, the burden of proof then passes to the tax authorities. Ano yung burden of proof ng tax authorities? Na yung ginawa na transfer pricing documentation is not correct, no? The scope of each documentation obligation must also be seen in the light of the cost that the legislator has wanted to impose in the companies when the rules on transfer pricing documentation were laid down, no? So, may mga penalties. Okay. The level of the fine is determined in such a way that in the event of failure or inadequate fulfillment of the documentation obligation, a minimum fine corresponding to twice the same cost must be paid for not having prepared documentation in the first instance. So, yung wala kang ginawang transfer pricing analysis, no, may penalty. Okay. Kasi mandatory yung paggawa po ng transfer pricing analysis report, no? Ano sabi dito? It follows from the official maxim that it is the responsibility of the tax authorities and the National Tax Court to seek to obtain the relevant information for the assessment of a case when, as here, the information is not available to A, no? So, pag pumunta ka sa court, talagang lay down mo lahat to present ka lahat na to prove dun sa kaso na sinampa mo, no? So neither the tax authorities, the National Tax Court, nor the Tax Appeals Administration have made any attempt to obtain information about the comparison companies with a view to estimating their goodwill, no? So no attempt has even been made to estimate goodwill based on the information available, no? So yun yung observation ng court. Okay. So anong ginawa ng court dito? In-uphold niya yung ibang assessment, yung iba hindi, no? Okay. Anong oras na? Okay. Okay, so anong sabi ng court? It is proposed that tax authorities, as under applicable law, should be able to tax a taxpayer on an estimated taxable income or property if the taxpayer has not declared the income or property at the time of employment, or a bookkeeper or accountant has not submitted annual accounts at this time, no? So, ang laki ng role ng mga bookkeepers, ng accountants, no? This also applies to cases where a tax return or a tax annual account is so deficient that they cannot be equated with a tax return or a tax annual account, respectively. So, in accordance with the general principles of proof in such cases, it is in principle incumbent on the tax authority to make it probable that the estimated statement is no less probable than other statements in the light of the information in the possession of the tax authorities. Ano yung information na nandun sa tax authorities? Yung transfer pricing documentation prepared by the taxpayer. No? Okay. And ano yun, sa lahat ng mga cases, pagka may decision na yung court, nandoon yung legal basis for transfer pricing regulations. No? Kaya yung mga sinasabi natin sa inyo, yung mga legal basis, pati na yung sa documentation. No? Okay. So in this case, ano po yung transfer pricing method na na-agree nila, the transactional net margin method, no? So ano yung kino-compare sa transactional net margin method? The net margin, no? Yung net income na sinasubject sa tax, no? Okay. Okay, ano yung conclusion regarding the Armstrong Principle? The High Court then finds that Scott has been entitled to make a correction of his income. No? So, ano yung correction ng his income? Adjustment, no? In the income years 2006, 2007, 2008, and 2009. Pero yung 2010, hindi na, no? So out of the 5 years, 4 years yung pina-adjust, yung isa hindi na, no? So hindi daw siya entitled to make a correction dun sa income ng 2010, no? In accordance with general principles for reviewing administrative decisions, sabi ng court, the court may override the tax authority's discretionary statement of income if the taxpayer proves that the tax authorities have not made an estimate that the discretionary employment is based on an incorrect or deficient basis, and this is likely to affect it. Discretionary employment, or that the employer value is outside the scope of the discretion that accrues to the tax authorities if the valuation must be considered manifestly unreasonable of. Hereby also the Supreme Court's judgment of 22 September 2015, no? In other case. So it appears from the case that Scott has increased his income by 57.1 million Danish krone, no? So for the years 2006, 7, 8, 9, and 10. No? It further appears that this decision is based on adding the value of amortized goodwill to his income. So binalik yung amortization ng goodwill sa income and then itatax, no? So, and that in doing so, on the basis of an average consideration over the period 2006 to 2010, it is achieved that A's net margin ends approximately at the same average margin as the benchmark. So the High Court finds that in correcting the taxable income for A, and thus also for B, an individual estimate must be made for its individual year, where the starting point is also taken in what income A could be assumed to have obtained if action had been taken in accordance with the Armstrong Principle. No? So on that basis, and after an overall assessment of the information in the case, the High Court then finds that there is such a legitimate doubt. No? So kasi pag may doubt na, in favor of the taxpayer, as to whether the tax authorities' estimates have been made correctly, no? That the High Court remands the case for a consideration of the taxable income for A and B for the years 2006 to 2009. A and B are dismissed regarding the tax assessment for 2010. No? So sa 5 taon, yung 4 ipa-recompute sa i-remand siya, no, sa lower court. And then yung 2010, wala na. Canceled, no? Okay. So, yun po yung decision dito sa court and ng court dito sa case ng Pharma Distributor. Ang pinaka-importante, so anong lessons learned natin in this transfer pricing case? Very important talaga yung transfer pricing documentation. And the analyst or the one who prepares for the transfer pricing documentation should be prepared, no? Una, pag nakarating na yung case sa court, you will be summoned and then make your own testimony. So ano yung dapat? Dapat kumpleto talaga yung documentation mo and see to it that lahat ng dapat i-disclose na information are properly disclosed in your transfer pricing study. Kasi kung meron kang mga, at saka alam mo i-explain. Kasi kung in doubt ka sa treatment mo, and what is very important pa is that you have to consider the accounting standards. Kaya ang susunod ko, review ko na yung mga requirements ng SEC. Ang isusunod ko na naman na aralin ngayon yung mga accounting standards, no? Kasi during the transfer pricing documentation, you have to follow standards ng accounting. Hindi ka pwedeng mag-deviate, no? So, matatalo ka. Dapat compliant ka. That's why very particular ako sa compliance ng mga taxpayer, especially if they are in a particular industry na regulated, no? Kagaya ng PESA Registered Enterprises, may Republic Act talaga yan at saka may mga dapat sundin, no? So be very particular for that when you make a transfer pricing documentation. Anong oras na?
2 hours 6 minutes.
Okay. So, I would like to say thank you again. Ilan pa yung viewers natin?
5 viewers.
Okay. So, I would like to say thank you again, no, sa ating mga viewers. And if you really try to understand, if you really try to study further the transfer pricing, then para maintindihan nyo, you start with the theory and then on the applicable cases, no, that has been decided by the court. Why? Kasi nandun na yung buong proseso from the explanation of the industry, na anong nangyari during the transactions, anong ginagawa ng company, ano yung mga naging issues, and what is the resolution of the court, no? Kaya nga sabi na natin, very important talaga yung documentations kasi dyan lang naglalaro yung magiging decision ng court, no? Sa proper documentation. So with that, I would like to say thank you sa lahat po ng mga viewers and also sa ating mga subscribers. Thank you very much and let's call it a night.